Good afternoon, and on this glorious day, welcome to the 1 to 10 podcast with 110 Associates. The concept behind this podcast is to effectively put together a platform to inspire, motivate, and educate those who are looking to become COOs or CFOs, whilst at the same time giving real value to those already at the top, who maybe want to hear and learn from their peers. I am delighted today to welcome my esteemed guest, Mr. Steve Darrington, who is currently serving as CFO at Phoenix Private Equity. By way of background, he has been there for close to 20 years, and I guess prior to that has had a very interesting and varied career, which included, I believe, starting out as a pro golfer. So Steve, welcome. Thank you for your time. How are you?
Very well, thanks, Khuram. Thank you very much for inviting me. Serving 20 years at Phoenix, you get less for murder.
No. I forgot to say, actually, so recently your efforts and hard work have been recognized in an industry award. So you are currently serving as CFO of the Year, I believe.
Yeah, that was a great honor. As I think we said a while ago when we were talking about it, it's definitely it's an award for longevity rather than ability after 20 years. But it was nevertheless. It's always nice for your peers to recognise, and so I'm very pleased to be the recipient.
No, definitely. Perfect. All right. So, Steve, I guess without further ado, if we, I guess we've obviously got a few questions that we want to kind of run through and get your thoughts on. I guess let's kick off with your journey, I guess, to becoming a COO and CFO. I guess, how did you get to this point, and was it something that you'd always aspired to be?
Thank you. Well, the first thing, I often speak at my old school and universities and things, and you often get sort of young, fresh-faced, enthusiastic people looking to chart your career and the way you've gone about things, thinking that that's the way to become a COO, CFO, CEO, whatever. And the first thing I tell them is, whatever you do, don't do it don't do what I did, because it's definitely non-standard. My path was around about 16, 17. It was absolutely clear to me that I was the next Jack Nicklaus, and that academic life was irrelevant to me, which was a disappointment to my parents and my headmaster at the time. It took me 2 years and a father who knew a bit about sport at the highest level, for him to tap me on the shoulder and say, mate, I don't think you actually are the next Jack Nicklaus. And, it dawned on me that, professional golf was likely to be a very long period of earning no money. I started, in hindsight, I refer to it as charity work. So I suddenly realized that I had to sort of pick myself up and contemplate the horrible thought of actually working for a living, as opposed to playing golf. And so I did that. There was a certain amount of academic recovery required, but I was pretty focused, and so went off and got a degree, qualified as an accountant, and then ultimately did an MBA at Manchester Business School as well, just to prove that I could do the exams. And but on the way, when I was qualifying, the independent newspaper was formed. Back in 1988, 89, and I answered an advert for a financial analyst, and joined the newspaper right at its very beginning. And it was an astonishing period of time to be involved in that organisation. It had some highs and lows very quickly in its life. It very quickly became a bigger seller than the Times. The Times then reacted by cutting its price to 10p to try and put the Independent out of business or in trouble. We then had, we had the Lockerbie disaster where I remember being deputed by the editor to go and get the head of operations out of a bar so we could pull the front page. So, being at the sharp end of a newspaper, even within the financial context, was amazing. And through a series of people I knew and fortuitous circumstances, someone tapped me on the shoulder a couple of years in and asked me if I wanted to go to The Economist, right. which I did, and spent 5 years there working as controller of The Economist, and doing a lot of working with their M&A team, doing a lot of their M&A work as well. I was very, very fortunate quite early on. Marjorie Scardino, Dame Marjorie Scardino, sorry, Marge, took over, who I had just such a fantastic time working for. The Economist gained a great deal of ambition. It had been a sort of, it's a very, very old and established company, but Marjorie brought some real American vim and vigor to the team, and I had a fantastic time working there for her for 5 years. And I also met my wife there, which that was obviously a very significant turning point in my life. After about 4 or 5 years, it became clear to me, it was a combination of two things. My wife had gone to Harvard, and she knew a bunch of people in Boston. One of which is a chap called Doug Rinaldi, who was the son of Bob Rinaldi, better known as the Bear in American corporate circles. Right. Who for many years was the chief executive of AT&T, which in the time when AT&T was the largest company in the world. And a combination of two things. One, we just happened to be at a party, and I met this guy. And the other thing was, I was starting to realize that The Economist, even with, by which time Marjorie had moved on to run Pearson's, to become the first female chief executive of FTSE 100. But I realized that through some of the M&A deals that we'd looked at and ultimately not done, that The Economist really still was quite a traditional company, and it was never going to have the sort of ambition that I had and wanted to do. And at the same time, I met this guy called Doug Rinaldi, who was the Harvard Business School Baker Scholar Award winner. He had a very well-known sort of corporate giant father, and I guess he had big shoes to fill. And one of the ways he decided he was going to go fill those shoes was to get out and be entrepreneurial. And he put together a business plan for a business called Fax International, which it sounds remarkably quaint nowadays, but it was moving fax traffic over IP networks. And cutting a long story short, he kind of made me an offer I couldn't refuse, to be head of finance for the 3 European startups in Frankfurt, Paris, and London. And after a couple of years of doing that, he said, "Will you come be my CFO in the United States?" Right. By which time we were operating in 20 countries. We went out and raised over $500 million in the markets. We went toe-to-toe with WorldCom. And for those of you with a good memory, WorldCom was the largest bankruptcy in the history of humanity, and didn't do us any good. So we went through Chapter 11. We got sued for $100 million personally. We bought the intellectual property back, and we founded another business called NetNumber, which is a very successful, thriving business today. All that was over 20 years ago. During the course of that, there was a period of time where we were sort of becalmed, didn't have a job, needed a job while we were raising money. And I popped into, at the time I was living in New York, I popped into New York City to the offices of Spencer Stewart, and had a video conference with a gentleman called Sandy Muirhead, who was working for a US investment bank, Donaldson, Lufkin and Jenrette, who had a private equity business called Phoenix Private Equity, which they'd acquired from an old investment bank in the city of London. Cutting a long story short, he and I agreed that I'd come and do an interim job as CFO of a clinical trials business that they jointly invested in. I joined on September the 3rd, I remember, because it's the day before my wedding anniversary. And by 5 o'clock, the chief executive had resigned. And so I found myself in the first week becoming not only CFO, but acting chief executive, and worked with DLJ to sell the business, which we ultimately did successfully. I then went back, we raised the money, we founded Net Number. And at the end of 2000, the kind of nuclear winter set in, as it was called in technology. Anyone who was in the venture world and technology world, it was a difficult 5 years for technology. And it became very clear to me that I was a cost to Net Number that they didn't need, because they weren't going to be in a position to IPO, which would have been kind of my role for quite some time. So I had a word with Doug, who still is one of my closest friends to this day. And at the same time, Sandy Muirhead phoned me up and said, we've got the opportunity to buy ourselves out of what was now Credit Suisse, because Credit Suisse had acquired Donaldson, Lufkin and Jenrette. Do you want to come and join us? And I said, no, thank you. I'm doing this thing. And then about 3 or 4 weeks later, he phoned me again. And then a month later, he phoned me again. And he said, I'm really not going to phone you again after this. And you say no this time. Something I'd done while working at UCT, which was the clinical trials business they liked. So eventually, kind of, as the nuclear winter set in, I thought, oh, well, I'll go and have a chat. And kind of a long story short, I joined. We did the buyout on March the 26th of 2001. So we are literally almost to the day 20 years old at Phoenix Equity Partners.
There we go.
And I moved back from the US on, I started work on beginning of June, and moved back on September the 4th from New York. So, which turned out to be a good week to leave New York, because a week later some aeroplanes flew into the Twin Towers. So and then so a lot happened in the first 15 years, and then the last 20 years I've been a partner and CFO and Chief Risk Officer at Phoenix. So
brilliant. And I guess I know you mentioned at the start that the background, the route to this point was somewhat unconventional, shall we say? But then I guess you kind of walked into the CFO-ship at Phoenix having already operated at that level, and I guess your experience as well has been very varied but extremely commercial in its nature, right? So for you, when you first stepped into, I guess, a CFO role within a private equity business, what were the biggest challenges you faced?
Well, there's, I think, two things that really sort of stick in my memory.
From also acting as chief exec at the same time.
Yeah. So sort of being slightly poacher turned gamekeeper. The thing moving into the CFO role at Phoenix is we were effectively a startup. So we'd spun out. We had 12 of us, most of whom were previously working at a private equity group within an investment bank, as was often the case in those days. So many of the private equity firms that we know today spun out of a much larger institution, and so we were setting everything up. We were new offices, new systems. We'd taken with us a fund, but we were sort of reconstituting everything that had been provided previously by an investment bank. So a lot of the first year was running around, just organizing advisors, office space, every service provider that a business had, we had to get a new one. So that was fairly busy. And the other thing is becoming becoming a partner and a senior officer in an institutional investor is very different to the slightly seat of the pants entrepreneurial life that you lead running a business that, certainly some of the entrepreneurial periods, we raised 13 rounds of finance, in 5 years. I think the longest period of cash we ever had in the bank was 7 months. So the minute you raise money, you were straight back out raising Series C, Series D, Series E. And so, whereas an institutional investor, albeit entrepreneurial, as a private equity investor, you do have an institutional footprint and a level of institutional quality that you have to portray. So it's moving from that slightly seat of your pants to a slightly slower pace, but a much more institutional footprint.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, interesting. I guess it's, I guess in hindsight, you kind of experienced both sides of the coin, right? So you're able to, I guess, form that view.
It's a difficult thing, because I would say the only way, because we've made over 50 investments since we've been there, and I've got to know some of the investments I've brought to the firm, and I've got to know every chief executive, CFO of all of our businesses. It's an interesting thing, but particularly in our space, because we're not venture, so we're not Series A first rounders. We're buying established business that have already achieved a great deal. So you're dealing with CFOs and CEOs, who've got a significant degree of professional capability.
Yeah.
And to be credible with them, you've done. My old boss at the Economist, Rupert Pennant-Ray, said something that's quite sexist and rude, really. But he said the definition of economist was someone who knew 250 sexual positions, just didn't know any women. And you needed to be very, very careful to make sure that you didn't present. We're the hotshot investment guys. And by the way, we've actually never run a business. We've never known what it was like to be difficult on cash, having to go to the bank, to do all those fire people or hire people. When we were expanding Unify, Fax International, Unify Net Number, we hired 2,000 people in 18 months in 20 different countries. That you've got to hustle to get that done. So it's very important that you can credibly discuss with these entrepreneurs what it's like to run a business and genuinely be in their shoes. So what I would say is you can't credibly do this job without having 20 years of commercial experience, but of course that's not a practical reality for the majority of people, but it happens to suit my marketing anyway.
No, absolutely. Yeah, definitely held you in good stead. So I guess if we then move to the current day, what, as you kind of look back on the last 20 years, I mean, what would you say have been the top 3 skills that you feel you have needed or have served you well in your role as CFO?
You've got to be willing to work. You've got to be willing to do everything. The phrase chief cook and bottle washer, particularly in a business of our size. I mean, I think the word private equity now covers an incredibly broad church. You've got the KKRs and the Blackstones at one end, and then you've got kind of venture to some degree at the other. And even within what used to just be called the mid-market, you've now got a vast array of investors investing from sort of 200 million, 500 million, billion, 3-4 billion is now middle market. And the footprint of those businesses are quite different. Phoenix has got, when everyone says how many employees, we've always got something between sort of 28 and 35, and it's very unlikely we'll ever have more than 50 in any incarnation. So in a business of that size, you've still got all the stuff to do, but you don't have lots and lots of people with job titles of this is the stuff I do. So you've got to be willing to do everything. You've got to be a very, very broad church.
Yep.
The other thing is, as a CFO, you tend to be an accountant. You won't be doing much accountancy for very long. I think probably 20% of my job has anything relating to do with numbers and finance. And other people in the industry, I'm sort of pinching a quote that said, from a US CFO in private equity, that says, for the last 20 years, I've been practicing law without a license. You do a vast amount of contract work, legal work. Yeah. Increasingly, risk is a huge part of your portfolio. Managing risk, understanding risk, and then nowadays we've got things like ESG, all of which IT, all those. So you've got to have a pretty broad skill set to be able to sort of sit in that chair and cover all those bases.
And I guess with the diminishing involvement with accounting or finance, as you put it, I guess that's also in part on you to kind of bring in the right people, right, and to be able to be that engine room behind you, so to speak, so that you are then able to focus on the other areas that require your input and attention.
It's absolutely critical. You've got to have the right backup. increasingly, a lot of what we do is outsourced, so you've got to have the right business partners. But that's absolutely true. You've got to, you simply, you can't do it all.
No, agreed.
And of course, and then the other thing you've got is, and this is the thing I often say, in most organizations, if you're the CFO, you're the top finance bod. You know, if anyone wants to know anything about finance, they come and talk to you. In a private equity, you know, it became very, very clear to me that you know, any meeting I sat in Phoenix, you know, with our professional team, I had 20 people around the table, all of whom felt they could do my job better than me. And you have to, you know, that's the nature of the deal professional.
Yeah.
You know, they're very bright, very well educated, very financially astute. If they weren't, they definitely didn't ought to be doing that job.
Yeah.
And so you need to be able to prove that you can live with them. And you know, and I've been involved in an investment committee level since day one. And you know, I said to our chairman when he hired me, I said, if you want someone who's going to sit in the corner and add up the books, then definitely that won't be me, because I will have an opinion and you'll hear about it. But I think that's been important. I hope the colleagues that I've worked with over the years would attest to the fact that, you know, I take part and hopefully ask challenging questions and think about stuff. You know, we come from similar disciplines, but it takes a bit of, particularly if you've been a CFO for a while and you get used to kind of being the big dog in the finance side, literally to sit in a room where literally everyone thinks they can do their job, your job better than you. It takes a bit of adjustment.
No, definitely,
for both sides.
That's a common theme we hear as well, right? I guess certainly for candidates as they become more senior, it's that ability to interact and even stand up for yourself with investment professionals and the like. So no, certainly something that I've heard before. You just mentioned the C word, C word being challenges. So I guess from your side, what do you feel are the biggest challenges that you face on a daily basis in order to do your role? I sense that you've mastered the dealing with deal professionals side. So
yeah, no, I think look. I guess regulation and managing, and I don't mean regulation in a bad way, but the industry has fundamentally changed in the last 25 years. You know, I've been around venture and private equity for 30 years. You know, 10 years on one side, looking to raise money and you know, and dealing with what it's like to have venture and private equity sort of manage it as an investor and involved in your daily life, sometimes more or less involved than you would choose. And then on the other side, being those people who are involved. But you know, it is now, it's an institutional capital class. You know, and increasingly as we're now seeing efforts of the industry to get closer and closer to retail investors, you know, that will only mean further regulation. And so, you know, that point I made when you come into the industry, moving from the very fast-paced, slightly seat of the pants to the regulated. 20 years ago, the regulation actually was very, very light touch. It was quite straightforward. Over the last 20 years, you see with you know, LIFMD, with ESG regulation, with all the new tax rules, you know, you spend a great deal of time making sure that your structures and the way your business operations move forward are consistent and compliant with regulation. So and of course, you know, 20 deal professionals who just want to go and do deals, that's just not, you know, they don't, you're definitely not the most popular person in the world where you tell them, oh, you can't do that because of this regulation or that regulation, or I assume you've thought about this before you made an offer for that. And so, you know, that's quite a significant challenge. And the other thing is, in a business like ours, you know, you raise money every 5 years. You know, there is, you know, you raise a new fund, and there is you've got to go out and resell yourself. For me, funny enough, I found that to be actually one of the, you know, it is obviously a challenge. You've got to go out and, you know, you go through a sort of weird phase. I've often said this to my colleagues, you know, when you're in the venture world, you never got more than 6 months money. You're always fundraising, and there's a permanent sort of feeling of uncertainty around everything you do. And if you're not comfortable with uncertainty, that ain't the place you definitely want to be. Otherwise you'll go crazy. In private equity, it's quite weird. Every sort of 4 or 5 years, you basically get this chunk of guaranteed income for 10 years. And then you go for 2 or 3 years where you kind of almost forget the uncertainty, and then boom, it's fundraising time again, and you're back into that. So you have this sort of crests and peaks and troughs, and going out and so reselling yourself every 5 years is a bit of a challenge, but it's also an opportunity because it tends to force, you really refresh, you really look at the business, try and make sure that you're moving things forward. It's a way of stopping you getting into a eat, sleep, repeat type of process.
Do you find that it's gotten easier with time, or have the changes in regulation and the ongoing, I guess, challenges around those changes, is that what's kind of effectively kept you on your toes and kept you, I guess, feeling energized and excited about each cycle?
I guess. I mean, I'd hate to think I'm energized and excited about regulation, but sometimes, and the other thing is sometimes it's kind of like medicine. You look at it, it's a massive pain, but actually, it makes the industry stronger. It's the right thing to do. It's like taking the medicine. It might not taste nice, but you're doing it because you're going to be better in the long run. So sometimes that regulation, and the thing that. Funny, the thing that anyone who works in our business will be bored hearing this, but I'll bore you with it now, is just never ever forget it's other people's money. And I think that's the fundamental, the one thing I remind myself every single day is it's other people's money. You are investing pensioners' money, savings money. We've got a broad base of institutional investors, but the common thread is it's other people's money. We're working and investing. So that's a reminder every single day that there is you can do what you like with your own money, but when it's other people's money, you have a heightened level of responsibility. And sometimes if you happen to be sitting in my seat, the regulation can help you corral and marshal people who are perhaps less inclined to embrace regulation. It gives you a little bit of a stick to beat them with.
No, fair enough. I mean, refreshing to hear you say that, actually, Steve, because I guess the industry gets a lot of bad press, right, about not having that certain moral compass or ethics in place. So, refreshing to hear you kind of, I guess, package it in that way. I guess leading on to the next question, then, what's kept you? I guess what do you love most about not just your role but Phoenix and the company, and I guess what's kept you there for this long, right? Because it's
well, I could say 3 very expensive children, but apart from that, look, I think it is the variety, it is the change, it is actually being around smart people. It is really, it is genuinely fantastic on a daily basis to be intellectually challenged. And when you are in a room with 20 people, all of whom think they can do your job better than you, you are going to, whether you like it or not, you're going to be intellectually challenged. And to see, you only survive in this industry by backing, making the right decisions about who you back. But the process of backing those individuals, you see entrepreneurs who are, who go through incredible adversity. I mean, years ago, The Economist did this survey, the difference between middle managers in the Fortune 50 and entrepreneurs who'd appeared in the Inc. 500, which is a magazine in the US, which is a sort of, it lists the top entrepreneurs each year. And the bottom line was entrepreneurs were far less able to be right, but but their belief that they were right was off the scale compared to the average middle manager who, by nature, sort of went to a place of certain degree of career safety. Whereas entrepreneurs have this ability, despite all the odds that present themselves, to go on and do it nevertheless and just keep doing it. And sometimes they don't make it. And I think seeing people fail and then recover is a fantastic and motivational life lesson. But just seeing that creativity and just boneheaded cussedness sometimes that it is taken to make a successful business, and then to be able to genuinely help them on the next stage of their journey. I think we've all known and studied and seen, businesses go through life cycles, and it's not always the same person or group of people, and this is often the case with CFOs. A CFO to go from A to B isn't necessarily the one that goes from D to E.
Yeah.
But what Phoenix has been able to do, and I think what private equity generally does, is to be able to help people who perhaps without a little bit of guidance might have made a few wrong turns and might have taken a step back with their business. And we're able often to come in at that point where they themselves are institutionalizing slightly, growing to a certain level where the CEO can't keep control of everything, has got to start hiring a second level team. And so it's that variety and the opportunity to learn from, people doing fantastic things. I've been very lucky to work with some fantastic colleagues, but also similarly fantastic entrepreneurs, both CFOs, CEOs, COOs, sales, head of sales, who really do make you sort of look and think, wow, that's a fantastic way of thinking and a fantastic way of doing things, and only drives you forward as well.
Yep, brilliant. And I guess at this point I'm going to have to bring in the recruitment angle somewhat, so forgive me. But I guess what would be interesting is two questions for you. Firstly, in the past, when you have been hiring, is there a certain character trait, or are there any kind of specific skills or abilities that you like to look for? And secondly, I guess for the demographic or the community out there of controllers or number 2 level profiles who are, really itching to get to that number 1 seat, what areas of development do you feel they need to kind of be considering in order to get to that point?
So in terms of attributes, I mean, there's Clive Woodward famously has this very binary way of his initial assessment. For the majority of the time, for him it was rugby players, and then for a period of time when he was the Olympic performance director, he called him a sponge or a stone. Stone was someone who it didn't matter what he said, they were going to carry on doing what they do. Like they weren't learners. And whereas sponges were people who drank in, they wanted to learn. They looked to change, to grow. I think he famously used to say that Johnny Wilkinson was such a sponge that he used to emotionally drain Clive, because Johnny will just like, oh, give me more feedback.
Yeah.
So I look for sponges. I look for people, sponges with an inquiring mind. I think the nature of our job, it constantly changes. No two challenges are the same. But your ability, you can't necessarily, you won't learn the skills to do the job well if you don't naturally go, well, hang on a minute, how does that work? Or why did that happen? Or that business did well and that one didn't. What was the different? And you've got to be the sort of person that asks. You've got to be the sort of person that sits watching the telly, and every time you hear something you don't understand, haven't heard of before, gets your phone out and Googles it, because you can't stand not knowing what that meant. So I definitely look for that. Also look for humility. There is no, no matter how good you are, there are better people out there, and no matter how good you are, you've got the opportunity to improve. I've learned that very, very significantly over my career. And so humility, willingness to take guidance, learn, is absolutely critical. Without that, you will struggle. And then the last thing is cultural fit. You've got to be a person that fits. You've got to understand the culture of your organization, and see whether this individual. I've interviewed very, very super bright Oxbridge firsts, never had a B in their life, who within 5 seconds of the interview starting, I've gone, no, they won't fit for whatever reason. Whether it's arrogance, or a belief they're going to get there a little bit faster than they really are. Sometimes you need to be patient, and you've got to understand that cultural fit. Otherwise, you're not being fair to you or indeed that individual, because if they don't fit culturally, it's virtually certain they won't be successful. And so, if you're a controller, be patient would be the don't rush and get the first thing that you get offered. There'll always be someone will always offer you a job, if you've got the qualifications and a bit of experience. But really decide, again, that cultural fit. What sort of person are you, and therefore what are you looking for? I remember speaking to a young analyst who was desperately keen to do well at Phoenix, and he asked me the question, what sort of person do they want me to be? And I just said, no, stop. You're going to be you the rest of your life, whether you like it or not. Make sure you look for an environment that fits you. There's a certain, we all have to bend slightly to fit, but really do the time on making sure you really interview the organization as much as being interviewed. Look at what makes them successful. Look at what their values are. Look at the things that they value, and make sure that correlates. Make sure that correlates with you. It's easier for me to say this now, but don't be safe. I think if when you research and all that, you're a bit scared at the scope of the job, then that's definitely the one to be on your list. If you think I can nail that, just that is not the job for you. You'll do it for a couple of years, you won't go anywhere, and you'll soon be bored and you'll be back in the market again. So be patient and be ambitious. I think it's a and remember, you're not going to be an accountant for very long in a senior role. So that's the other thing. Understand and embrace the fact that you're going to be a lawyer, a risk manager, an IT director, HR manager. Goodness knows what you're going to end up doing. I hate to tell you some of the jobs I've done.
But it's all part of the journey, right? And I think that's often, certainly with candidates in today's market, quite often it is that, I guess, urgency to move away from the day-to-day accounting, for example, and that often spurs these candidates on. And I guess to your point, it's again nice to hear the mantra around patience, because yes, the right job will come along, but it's important, as you say, to know yourself and know your own values, and find something that resonates with that, as opposed to just rushing into the first FD or CFO role that comes along. With yourself then, Steve, I mean, over the years, obviously there's been various changes which kept you on your toes, but are there any kind of practices or habits that you've kind of adopted in order to maintain your own self-development? I know podcast seems to be the buzzword of lockdown. Everyone seems to be very much engaged with that kind of form of media. But from your side, I mean, how have you maintained your ability to kind of continue in the role and be effective?
I do have a very, very inquiring mind, to the point where it drives my wife absolutely crazy. And so I just, it's a fault. It's not a quality. I am obsessive. I mean, you see behind me, I read ridiculously, and increasingly now with the nature of media, I Google 100 things a day at least. So I hate not knowing something, and so I guess that's the thing that's kept me interested. So if new regulation comes out, I want to know all about it. I always really want to be an expert in everything, which of course is a ridiculous thing, and you're doomed it sooner or later. But I'm 57, 58 this year. I haven't grown out of it yet, and so I suspect And look, it's not all about private equity. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be about growing flowers or the internal workings of a combustion engine, or the history of Porsches. Yeah, so I'm absolutely obsessed with just Googling things and finding out stuff works. And and I think that's what can keeps you going, gets you up. There's never a day when there's not stuff to find out about. And I think if you apply that in your working life, you end up knowing more about stuff. And it's really as simple as that. I haven't got any magical formulas other than be inquiring, ask questions, find out answers.
Be a sponge.
Be a sponge, I guess.
Lovely. So look, we're kind of approaching the home straight now. I guess, in your opinion, Steve, kind of from a Phoenix perspective now, the next 12 to 24 months, and you've mentioned changing regulation, what do you see are going to be the challenges or the key areas for your team or your business to focus on in the next 12 to 24 months as we come out of this COVID situation, I guess, and hopefully the world starts to mend again and return to some form of normal?
Yeah, I think think about the last 12 months, 14, however long it is. It might be 18 months by the time we start reflecting back. Just think about what happened and what it's done. Our business has actually had a phenomenally strong year. We've adapted to the situations reasonably well. We were fortunate to some degree by design, that we picked a portfolio that was highly defensible, and we're a niche investor. We look for very specific character. We don't follow GDP growth. We're looking for businesses that have got something very specific to that business that provides a defensible position. And as a result, COVID represented a threat, but these businesses were able to. Some of them were able to actually make it played to their strengths, and those that it didn't, they were able to make adjustments that allowed them to recover. So I think that there will be a period where there will be an awful lot to learn, both in terms of the resilience and risk management of businesses, but also the operations and the way that we all work. The easiest one is we'll be working from home a lot more. I suspect we probably will be doing it a bit more. Ultimately the pendulums swing both ways, and the thought of not going back to the office ever again, there'll be a few organizations that will make public statements and some publicity out of that. The majority of us will probably be back in the office 2 or 3 days a week at least. But that will be a change, because I think for a long period of time, a certain population of business leaders that perhaps didn't trust people to do it have realized, well, actually it all worked fine, and we're all here on the other side of it. So there's learning to do, there's opportunity. We'll be back into a growth phase, I think. There's been a lot of liquidity pumped into the market. The first phase of that will be growth. I think there will be something to think about in 3 or 4 years' time, once we start to see whether that converts into inflation and how we adjust, having spent a fair bit of money as a nation over the next little while. But there will definitely be opportunity, and translating that opportunity into the new normal will also, we like to think of ourselves as sort of intellectually driven investors. We have a absolutely world-class origination team with very, very smart people whose job it is basically to be inquiring, to dig around in the weeds and see the emerging trends. And that work will need a complete refresh, because the emerging trends will be dictated by a different set of drivers. But that pendulum again will also swing back, and the timing of when the slightly more traditional businesses come back will also represent opportunities. So it's recognizing it's happened, having a good look at what's happened, and learning as much as you can, but then very quickly make sure you're not in the rearview mirror and looking forward.
No, that's fair. So yeah, no, I guess this now all leads me to kind of, I guess, the final piece of our chat today. And you very kindly gave a lot of information about your early life and growing up as the next Jack Nicklaus to then, I guess, having to accept that might not happen. But I guess if you were faced with young Steve now, what 3 bits of advice would you give to Steve?
Well, the young Steve's quite specific because it's me. I'd say take your academics seriously, but beware of sporting dreams. I've known quite a few world-class sports people over the years. A few make it, but it's the thousands that don't. And on a probability adjusted basis, unless you are absolutely fantastic, just remember that there's 2 sides to the coin, and the next Jack Nicklaus or the next Johnny Wilkinson or whatever your sport, Andy Murray or whatever it is, it's probably unlikely. So make sure you don't throw your academics, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I was guilty of that, and there was a certain amount of recovery had to go on. The other thing is stay as fit as long as you can. I think one of the if this year has taught us nothing, anything at all, health is not promised to any of us, and it can be taken away very, very quickly. So I think and all of us, we're all quite driven individuals. We work very long hours, but stay healthy is one I would definitely I would and the other one is don't get sued, which is at a relatively young age I got sued for $100 million. Now there's a phrase that lawyers will occasionally say, and I've actually heard it in my life at Phoenix, is even if you did get sued, you definitely win. If you ever hear that phrase, run a mile, because it's the process. Even if, and we've won, we won, but it was a long 4 years of your life, which you just don't need it. But on the other hand, I did an MBA, and with great respect to Manchester Business School, where I did my MBA, I learned more by being sued than I ever learned in my MBA. Hopefully, I learned a lot in my MBA. I use the story: if you're walking down the road and a man with a hammer is walking towards you, the first time that happens, you don't even think twice. If that man hits you with a hammer and hits you on the head with a hammer, for the rest of your life, whenever you see a man with a hammer, you will think, I'm going to check that guy out, because I remember what happened last time. And getting sued, you get a period of your life trawled over by lawyers, and every decision you make is reviewed. And even if you were right and you did it for all the best possible reasons, it ain't nice to have someone come at you trying to claim that they weren't the right possible reasons. But it does teach you for the rest of your life how to think. Is this right? Am I doing the right thing? Could I defend this? When I go to sleep at the last minute tonight, will I be proud of this decision? And I think that's taught me a lot, and has allowed me to be a much better risk manager and corporate conscience. But net, just don't get sued.
One question I do have, and I promise this is the last one, but I guess I've read a lot about, I guess, the links between high performance and having that kind of mindset of a successful sportsman often translates well into other industries because of the discipline and the habits that they form in kind of forging their careers. I mean, from your own personal experiences, do you feel that having that discipline of being a competitive sports person early in your career has lent well to recent times where you've been operating in a different capacity, but obviously still having to maintain standards?
It's a funny thing. I think it's probably, for me, been to the detriment of my business career, because you, as a professional sports person, ultimately, there's really one thing that matters, and that's winning. you win the golf tournament, you win the tennis match, you win the rugby match, and an absolute focus on winning is quite difficult in a corporate environment. Partly because if you have an absolute, it can be about you winning and not necessarily the wider team winning. And often top sports people, they're not marvelous people to spend vast amounts of time with. There are some exceptions, but what it takes to get there is an absolutely sort of dogged, single-minded desire to achieve something. Now, funny enough, I think there's a vast correlation between top sports people and good entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs have to go, despite all the evidence to the contrary, they still have to kind of go on, keep going. But sometimes to be part of a team, the edge that spending time amongst elite sports people, my son's an exceptionally good tennis player. He's now an investment banker in Manhattan, but for the period of time where he was dreaming of being a tennis professional, seeing how hard and how much sacrifice that takes, and dogged personal drive, it's difficult to do that as part of a team. Now, team sports are slightly different. I happen to believe rugby is an astonishing sport, because if when the camera goes down the team, it has to keep going up and down. You've got slightly less nowadays, they're all huge nowadays, but certainly in my day, the scrum half was not very big at all. The second rows at 6'8", and but they were all it was a sport for all different types and personalities, and I think to some degree team sports can help you, but even within then, if you're going to be genuinely world class, you have got to have decided that age 3 and done pretty much nothing else. And so it's a difficult mix. I'm always slightly skeptical of the of the corporate sports presenters for the team building, because they say a lot of things, but if you get to know a few of them, they're granite. They really their unyielding personal drive is the fundamental thing that gets them there.
Brilliant. Steve, thank you for your time. It's been
a pleasure.
It's been really enjoyable, really interesting as well to hear about your journey. And yeah, look, hopefully this is well received when we manage to kind of get the editing done and get it out. But thank you again for your time. And I will catch up with you soon.
Love to see it when it's done.
Brilliant. Thanks, Steve.
Great, thanks. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye.